Well, hello everybody. Pastor Randy here, coming to you on Tuesday with our newest edition of Making It Simple. Yesterday we talked about determination and what fuels that. I want us to look at that side of things today. Motive. What drives it? What is our determination fueled by is the motive. The motive is a revelation, an exposure, if you will, of the heart. What's in the heart? We're not talking about the blood and the muscle, the oxygen and all the other things. The intent, the desire. When I was in law enforcement, we use words like aforethought and malice, generally associated with pretty horrible crimes. Ultimately, what that word means in very making it simple type terminology is you thought about it and you did it anyhow. You thought about it and you didn't care what the results were going to be because you were determined to do it. We talked about that determination yesterday. We see as chapter 8 begins, those that were in opposition of the ministry of Christ, and even more so of the person of Christ, they had allowed their disdain for his position on truth and his position on freedom and liberty and all the different things that he was bringing to everyone. Their determination to get rid of him and everything that he was doing to prevent that teaching from continuing, to prevent anyone from hearing it, was driven by their motive. And their motive was, I want it my way, and I don't care what it takes to get it. I shared a couple of examples with you yesterday. So this stopped all level of reasoning. In other words, it grew to a place to where it truly did not matter. And they would grasp at straws, create things, make up things, lie about things. It didn't matter because the desperation was there in order to say, I am going to stay in my spot no matter what it takes. Not only was there determination there for that, the motive behind it was wrong, was wicked, was evil, because never in any of that was the result considered as to how it would or wouldn't affect other people because they didn't care. Have we returned to that mindset in the world today? I'm afraid that we have. Because rarely is the answer weighed out. We just see proclamations made and we just see different things presented to us, and there's no weighing out the balance here. There's no looking at how it's going to affect the masses or certain sections or groups they don't care. They being a very general term, those that are in power positions, just as these were in the days of Jesus. And I'm not calling out any one side over another, and I'm not aligning myself or anybody for that fact with one faction or another. I'm speaking in general terms of the attitude that is so prevalent in our world today. And I'm able to show you through these scriptures how they're linked together and why the same issue that was there 2,000 years ago is still here now. It goes back to the heart. And if that heart has not been translated and moved into a different place, in other words, like a transplant almost, a brand new one installed, that is filled with the understanding and the love of Christ, filled with the understanding and the love of God, then the same problems continue to manifest themselves and they just get reproduced over and over and over just by different people. The same problem is there, it's just a different group or a different era, a different generation, but there's no difference. Jesus, it tells us, this is a very important story that has a lot of depth that not always is reached in just a mere sermon on a Sunday morning. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. But I want us to look at what's being said here in these first several verses of chapter 8 of the book of John. This title, or this chapter, is subtitled Adultery. Now, when we hear that word, there's several different things that bounce around in our mind. Some instantly go to the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Others think immediately, of a unfaithful spouse. But what does this word mean? It is indeed being unfaithful. It is being putting yourself in another position, or placing yourself in another position that is outside of what you've committed to. In other words, it is being unfaithful to a commitment, relationship, and so we can have spiritual adultery. And, the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. We can have something else that takes the place of God, therefore committing spiritual adultery. Now, so we know the connotation of the word and generally how it's used. It does involve a infidelity, was the word I was searching for a while ago. Sorry about that brain freeze. And so obviously we relate that to a physical act between two adults. Okay. So Jesus, it says in verse 1, has gone unto the Mount of Olives. So he's still in the area. He's been dealing with these people, and they're just continually looking for anything to snag him on. And it says, early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and he taught them. Jesus was always ministering, always, because he met people where they were. He did what we're doing. Now, please don't take that the wrong way. I'm not comparing myself to Jesus by any stretch of the means. But he sat down and talked to people. He didn't berate people. He didn't make people feel unwelcomed or anything. He just talked to them. He laid it out and ultimately was saying, there it is. Do with it what you will. It's almost like going to a degree, like going to a buffet. You've got 100 things there in front of you, 100 items, vegetables, salad, main courses, desserts, the whole 9 yards. It's presented before you. It's there, and it's available. You can have any of it that you want. It's there. But it's up to you. Nobody's going to come fix your plate. Nobody's going to go up there and hold your hand and say, well, get a little bit of this, a little bit of that. No, here it is. That's what a conversation does. And the way that Jesus taught was very much along that way. He sat down and talked to people. He met them where they were, whether it was a need, whether it was a comfort. It didn't matter. It was grief. He just met them where they were. That was his heart. That should be the heart of every believer. That's my heart. Is I just want to meet people where they are. It's not about being nosy. It's not about getting too intrusive. It's not about anything. It's certainly not about judging, because we've all got issues. We talked about that yesterday, and we certainly very few. I probably can't say nobody or anybody, but very few of us exist that don't have some skeletons that we would rather keep right where they are. So this is not about pointing fingers. However, we see that that is the exact thing that happened in this passage. So we read on. So he's there and he's teaching. And he's having that moment with those that are there. The scribes and the Pharisees, it says, brought unto him. So they just burst right in. There was no respect whatsoever for Jesus. As a person, as a teacher, as a human. It didn't matter. They were determined. And their motive that drove this was so ungodly. and so selfish that they lost, and within the process of doing so, it also hurt their credibility. They're supposed to be leaders. They're supposed to be the pillars of the community that people look to for spiritual advice and leadership and all the different things that they're supposed to, be managing and helping people understand things of God. And this is how they act? What kind of example is that? So we see here, they came unto him, they brought unto him a woman taken in adultery. Now that word, when translated from the original language, means dragged in by force. So here is Jesus. Let me set the scene for you. He's in the midst of the temple. Okay, we can equate that to you sitting in church on Sunday morning or Wednesday night at a Bible study or whatever. Here comes a group of people, knock the door open, and they're literally dragging another human being, in this case a woman, who they claim has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, was there something physical going on? Sexual? Whatever the case. I mean, let's just be real here. We're having this conversation. Was she having lunch with somebody? Was she sitting on the couch or something? We don't know. We're not told. But they said in the act of adultery, taken in adultery. So was she speaking to someone outside of her husband? We don't know. But regardless, they've drug her in the room, and they said, and set her in the midst, or right in the middle of the crowd, right in the middle of the congregation, or the Bible study group, or the small group, or whatever. Here is a person who has been traumatized, drugged through town, ridiculed, and everything else. We don't know anything. We don't know the state of dress. We don't know anything, but this was a terrible moment on all accounts, because we're not given the details of this, so we can only speculate. Oftentimes it is taught that, I guess for simplistic purposes, she was caught in the bed with somebody, but that's not what it says. It says caught in the act of adultery. Okay, an adulterous affair, okay, again, can be mental, can be pursuing someone outside of your spouse. It can be, again, it could be out frolicking around and having a big time somewhere, and that's not who you're supposed to do. There's a lot of different angles that we can go with that. Okay, so immediately in our thinking, we go probably to the worst set of the example. But regardless of whether she is fully clothed, don't have any clothes on, or she's wrapped in a sheet, it doesn't matter. She's embarrassed. She's been brought here against her will. And she's got a claim, something against her before Jesus. Now, why did they do that? Why? Number one, how did they know? What business was it of theirs? We're not justifying wrong. Please don't understand. Please don't take that. I'm not saying that that's okay, if indeed that was going on. However, was it their business to handle it in that way? Of course not. None whatsoever. They said unto Jesus, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Okay, now there's a couple of questions there. How did they know that? Number one. And number two, if indeed it was in the very act, regardless of the physical nature of that, whether she was in Motel 6, or whether they were walking down the beach or having coffee somewhere, regardless, if she was caught in the very act, then there were two. We see no mention of the other side of that fraction. We don't. So this was a setup. It was not for the right reasons. The motive behind this was rotten, because they were looking to hang Jesus. They didn't care about her. They didn't care about how she was embarrassed, hurt, scared. It didn't matter. She was a pawn in this whole thing. It says, they turned to him and they said, now Moses, now remember, they're going back to what they'd already tried to do before, being the proclaimers of the law, the defenders of the law. But Jesus called them out on that before. And he said, wait a minute, that is what you claim to be, this aficionado of the law. However, you don't even know God. They're going back to that well again. You know, the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing, looking for a different result. But this was not because they were insane. They had a horrible motive behind what they were doing. Their determination to do what they were doing was all fueled by their hatred for Jesus. So therefore, this stemmed from the heart. The psalmist tells us that within the heart dwells evil. That's why the necessity for salvation, the necessity to come into Christ is there. To remove that wicked seed, to remove that desirous thing to hurt and maim and do wrong to others. We still have our humanity. We still have our emotions. We still get aggravated and frustrated about things. That's real. But the desire to hurt someone, the desire to end someone's life or their career, where does that stuff come from? They didn't care. It made no matter to them. So they said, Moses, they go back to the law, has told us, has commanded us, she ought to be stoned. The law did say that. The law did say that. If you break one of the 10 commandments, which adultery is one of them, the penalty was death, stoning. Now I want you to think about this. The act of stoning means that a person, a human being, is literally pelted with rocks until they die. Now think about that. This is what they were claiming that they wanted to do to this lady, woman, girl, whatever she was. And so they looked at Jesus and they said, what do you say? Because Jesus also, in their understanding, remember chapter 3, Nicodemus, we know who you are. And we know that the things you do could only be done by God. But they're setting that aside. But they're challenging him at the same time in their disrespect of their knowledge, their ignorance of their knowledge, ignoring it. We're going to set that aside, and we're going to challenge you that if you are who you say you are, you claim we don't know anything, you claim we don't know God, let's see what you're going to do. It tells us in the next verse, they said this to tempt him. That's what's written. We did this to tempt him that they might accuse him. We want to get him. And if we can just get him to say one thing that would allow us to justify our motive that is driving our determination to get rid of him, we'll feel better about ourselves. Not that we care, but we'll feel justified in ourselves. And that's what we can sell to the public. We were right. He was wrong. That's the same problem today, is gathering enough information on one side or the other to disprove the other side and to justify the action that took place. And it's almost never justification because again, the motive behind it is wrong. So it tells us here that they said this to tempt him that they might accuse him. But this is Jesus' response. It says he stooped down and with his finger he wrote on the ground as he had not heard them. He tuned them out. He wasn't listening to what they were saying. Because he knew their heart. He knew their motive. The rest of this story is amazing as to how it ends and what his response was to the woman. And I want to talk about that tomorrow because there's so much more here. I don't want to take our lesson any longer because I don't want to leave out anything. I told you yesterday we're going to teach this differently than maybe you've ever heard it before because I want us to recognize the intimate, personal nature of the entrance of her into the situation, the heart and the attitude and the motive of those that perpetrated this, those that brought this to be, and how Jesus responded to them and to her, because there was both. There was both. So I'm looking forward to being with you again tomorrow. God bless you. Thank you for joining me today. Have a good one.